Hello, welcome to Nature Persists in conversation with myself, Zena Edwards, and with Flo Hedlam, who will introduce herself in a moment. I have been doing performance poetry for 20 plus years. I've been writing around eco issues and climate awareness for since 2018, like really invested and looking into how poetry is as an embodiment tool to engage the senses, but also to help us to engage with the planet, to help us engage with the earth, and just looking at the cycles and how we can be nourished by the wisdom of the planet. It's a very exciting time, I think. We've had a global pandemic and a global lockdown, which is asking us to think about how we do things differently as a species. And this is an interesting time about how we can use creativity as an imagination tool also to do some really deep, profound and inspiring future thinking. And this is the reason for why I wanted to create a project called Nature Persists, as in, can we learn about the ancient wisdoms of nature and how it can teach us about ourselves and the parallels that nature has with us as a species, the soft body of the soft animal of our body, which is a quote from Mary Oliver's poem Wild Geese, which I absolutely love. And I want to introduce to the left of me on my screen Flo Hedlam. So please do go ahead. He's a good friend of mine, known you for a very long time. So please introduce yourself, Flo.
Thanks, Zena. Hi, my name is Flo Hedlam. I am a garden designer. I'm also a TV presenter. You might see me on Garden Rescue, which is a BBC makeover program, the premise of which is two designers designed to a brief of a homeowner, and they choose the winning design, and then both of us build the garden along with a set of landscapers. So I've been doing that for 3 seasons. I was on garden as well before that, and my journey into horticulture started about 11 years ago when I left my charity job and threw myself into this new passion. I'm also involved with a number of local community gardens around my area, and I do some teaching with young people and run a gardening club for a local charity. So I'm involved. I haven't got great nails because they're always dirty, but I love nature. I love being outside. I love this planet that we live on.
Fantastic. And I am going to introduce somebody who has been actually really supportive of me on another project that I'm working on called Poets Built It. And their name is Reeson, excuse me. I would like for you to introduce yourself and let us know why you're here today.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I've been doing this for 5 years, and I really am looking to find a way to take how I feel about what's going on in the environment currently and making poetry, or making some kind, it might not even be poetry, it might not be performance art, I don't know. But I'm here because I know how good Zena is at what she does in terms of making points and making me enthusiastic about things. So this evening I'm here with a pencil and a piece of paper, and I am here very much to learn, because I think there is a lot as poets we think we know, but we don't really. And it's really useful when you are in these processes and you're beginning to learn, when somebody says, let me teach you, you sit down and you listen. So I am here to be taught. Oh, thank you very much for having me, Zena. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for coming. You've been absolutely excellent in supporting me on Poets Built It, and it's much appreciated. And Poets Built It is a project that you can actually join. It's an online poetry community, and Nature Persists will be running my project. Nature Persists, which is a much broader program, shall be running through Poets Built It, and more about that a bit later. So we were having a little background chat before we actually started this conversation, and we were talking about the symbiotic nature of our relationship with the planet, and we were wanting to talk about how we're part of the ecology, And if you don't mind, I'd like to go back to US and talk about the Gaia theory, because I find that really fascinating. Because I was speaking about how I have this incredible fascination with just looking at plant life and getting a little bit geeky, getting a blurred, what they call a blurred, a black nerd, nerdy about it. And just looking at the veins on leaves and looking at the veins on my hands, and working with a fantastic visual artist called Heather Ackroyd as part of a duo called Ackroyd and Harvey, and a project she's been working on, which is growing grass, but actually using the photosynthesis to do like incredible portraits, leopard print. Poetry is written on grass, using this silhouette and the process of photosynthesis and how chlorophyll responds to the sun. And her saying that the cellular makeup of a chlorophyll cell is exactly the same as that of a human being's, except the difference is zinc is in chlorophyll and iron is in our blood cells. That's what makes our blood red. But otherwise, it's exactly the same. And that I find, I don't know, there's something extremely humbling about that. But I'm really interested again to tell us a little bit about the Gaia theory.
Yeah, so this is coming in from the 1970s, obviously through the period of the 1960s, where there was a lot of self-awareness happening. And my father is a chemist, and it was another chemist, a man called James Lovelock, and a microbiologist called Lynn Margulis in the 1970s, who suggested that living organisms interact with their inorganic surroundings on the planet. And it's a synergistic and self-relating complex system. So the whole planet, study of planetary habitability, things like how the biosphere and the evolution of organisms affect the stability of global temperature, even the salinity of seawater or atmospheric oxygen levels. And this is, when we look at where we are now, there's actually quite a lot of relevance to this. This whole hypothesis was very much kind of lauded at the time, and then was kind of criticized later on. There's a lot. Go and fall down a rabbit hole. It's really interesting going to see what the people who support this idea, that yes, we all, the whole thing, it's the whole idea of the giant turtle or the massive tree that often turns up when you see people talking about Gaia. So you have your roots and you have your top, and we are all part of this at some point. Everything on the planet connects with each other. And for me, growing up with somebody who I didn't know was doing what they were doing, I didn't realize quite what my father did when I was growing up. And it's only as he's got a lot older and he's gotten to his old age that it's become apparent that he was uncomfortable at the time with what he was doing and what was going on. So this has a kind of double resonance to me, that I was living with somebody who knew that they were doing damage, but they didn't kind of realize the consequence of that damage. So as a poet, I have quite a unique sort of inroad to this. I've written quite a lot of poems based around this idea that we are a system, and therefore when one thing is irrevocably altered, it will, the balance of everything gets out of whack. And I mean, you can see that now. You can see that very obviously in the way the world works. But the complexity of it, you talking about how roots and systems, how we can tap into that. I'm quite interested in the idea of how what we've done as humans, what the consequences of those actions are, without us necessarily realizing that what we're doing has been an action. We live here, we work here, we exist here. And on most days, we get through from the beginning to the end and we don't think about it. And I think trying to educate people on exactly what effect they do have on everything that is around them is the first step to kind of enlightening people to how we do it better. Because we all get into our habits, we get into our kind of ruts. If you think that we are part of a complex organism, everything you do will eventually have a consequence somewhere down the line, and it's finding a way to balance that. And this is why this whole thing is so interesting to me. So I'm going down the science route a bit more rather than the kind of feeling, you know, organic. I am the inorganic person here, trying to work out how that works.
I mean, that, because I love what you're saying, how the organic and the inorganic works together, because I do look at, you know, nature suddenly sprouting on a corrugated metal or out of a wall or something like this, and obviously there's some kind of organic nature, there's some organicness to that, because everything comes from the earth, and minerals, it all comes from the earth. But I just wanted to just backtrack just a little bit and ask you, Flo, because you're in gardens every day. So how do you, like you personally, how have you personally felt you've been, what you've learned about being part of the species, being a human on this planet? Like, do you have moments of revelation where you're like, where you're in awe?
Oh yeah, definitely. Almost every day is what they say, every day is a school day. There's always something to learn. And I think one of the things I've realized actually is that we have to tread very lightly in what we do on the earth. And nowadays choosing the right kind of plants that will survive, persist in this ever-changing climate that we're in. For example, getting people to stop using just chemicals to deal with things that they don't want in their garden. So it's like, oh, we don't want the weeds, we don't, and they just want to just spray it, or just put something on it it will get rid of the thing that you don't want, but it will trickle down into the soil and have a bigger effect. So where I can, I'm having conversations with my clients where I'm trying to talk to them and educate them, but also learn from them about how we do things much more naturally and organically, and just be kinder to the garden, to the earth. Because I work in spaces where people want lovely, beautiful gardens, and for me, the struggle is always this: I want to give you that, but I want to do it as sustainably as possible. So it's sometimes tension, but that's the conversation, and that's the growth, I think, for me and for everybody who I'm in contact with, that I'm working with.
Yeah, that's interesting, because there is like the aesthetics of growing, and us as a species who want to tell a story through creativity, and how we want our garden to tell a story of maybe like of our eye. And I'm thinking about this from a poetry perspective, like how I want to write about how I want to write about nature. I want my writing to be beautiful. However, we're living in a time when there seems to be so much sort of such an assault on the planet, is the only way I can put it. It's the only word I've got. And assault on the threats to green spaces, with building intensive building of high rises, or just intensive building on real estate, and how valuable real estate is. Moving families into, like, I live in North London. I used to live in North London. My mum's still in North London. And there's the massive Tottenham regeneration that's happening there, where they've moved in like 20,000 people in this tiny, like, postage stamp of an area is what it looks like. However, there's the beautiful Tottenham marshes there. There's the river there that, if you walk along it, will take you all the way up through Hackney. Keep going, you'll go into Islington. Keep going, you're up at Regent's Park. But when what's happened there is they've built, I can't remember what's the name, it's not the Crossrail, is it? It's a train line that takes you directly from Europe, and it drops you into Tottenham. Also, they've been building the university for the accommodation there for students. So I mean, it's like the landscape has changed immensely there. And I'm just thinking to myself, okay, this is kind of nice-ish, sort of. People need housing. However, are they affordable? And there's just going to be this overload of people on these green spaces, and I'm not trying to be selfish. I'm just trying to be aware that these spaces are really going to feel that load. So I'm thinking about how do I write about this and feel comfortable about writing about the beauty also without it feeling like I'm being very, I don't know, over romantic and a bit idyllic. You know, like I have part of the project that I'm doing inside Nature Persists, part of the program that I've got in there is something called writing from the pastoral to dystopia and back again, and how writing about nature was something that the privileged could do. They could sit around, you know, and look at without sort of like poetic melancholia and look at the shepherd with straw hanging out of his mouth and just think, oh, what a wonderful life he must have. He's just lazing around with his sheep. When actually agriculture is one of the most hardworking industries that there is. You know, you're up at the crack of dawn and, you know, you're there birthing cows, sheep, whatever that, you know, it's a difficult job. And then now we have this sort of like the clanging and the clanking and the clamor and the noise of urbanity. And I'm thinking, how do we as creatives, how do we as poets, how do we go back to looking at the awe and the wonder of nature again, when we have this hanging over us, this climate, without saying the C word, this climate situation that everybody's saying, we're all gonna die, we're all gonna burn. You know, it's like, when, you know, there are
I think,
sorry, I realize I'm talking a lot. Go ahead. Go for it, Flo.
Yeah, well, I think just answering your question about how do you write, because I write as well. I think you write honestly, or I write honestly, and I think, you know, when I think of somebody like Toni Morrison, I love her writing because she writes about beauty and she writes about brutality in the same space, and you know, it creates the full picture. And I think you have to be honest about the really lovely, soft, tender bits and the bits that are really shit and that are really heartrending. I think you have to put it all in there, like a, you know, like a Scotch bonnet, or one of those what they call those sweets that start off sweet and then they go sour and then they go sweet again. You know, one of those.
Yeah. S, do you have anything in response to some of the things I've said there?
Well, it's interesting to hear you and how your environment directly affects how you feel that you need to sort of approach these things. I live on the edge of what isn't quite ancient woodland, but it is near enough. It's been there, it's been established for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I live in a city now, just become a city, where there is this constant fight between what is acceptable in terms of how things look and what should be left to just grow wild. I live surrounded by people who are obsessed to the point of paranoia that their verges are not cut. And I know enough about how we need to keep insect populations high enough so that they can pollinate, because that's one of the most important parts of this whole kind of ecosystem that we are destroying. And when you've got people who are more obsessed about how it looks than actually what it does, that's half the battle. How do you educate people for whom they don't really care as long as they're happy? This, I think, is the 64. I have the utmost respect for Flo. If you're going into people's gardens and you're able to make them start thinking about those big questions, those serious issues, that it isn't just about, you know, what you plant, it's why you plant it. My husband at the moment, my husband works in industrial signage, and he has a contract going currently with a local council for recreating signage, sort of replacing signage in country parks. And I am encouraged massively by this project because they're building insect habitats into the back of the signs. So anything that's going up is going to have an environmental impact. Whether you like it or not, there is nothing you can do about it. But if you go into it with a sympathetic eye And an understanding that, hey, we know this sign has to be here, but if we put a bee habitat, an insect habitat, and we allow stuff to grow around the sign so we don't get upset about it, there is a harmony that can be found. I think as poets, we have a really good opportunity now to encourage that harmony in people, to make them become part of that process. And I think the way you do that, I think history becomes really important. Listen to you talking about Tottenham and how stuff has changed. If you look at how appallingly dusty and awful London used to be, even back in the 70s, when as a kid I used to inhabit places that were levels of smog which were off the charts, things have got better. But it's finding the balance between, well, better isn't good enough. We need to move past that. We need to make something that is sustainable and long-term. And that, certainly as a poet now, my wish is to try and not hold up something and say, this is wrong, this is why. Trying to give people something. Here's a start. Why do you think this is wrong? How can we? And this is why I'm really interested to see your stuff about giving people nature to create other things out of it, other than it just being nature, so that they can find an associated thing that they can plug themselves into and have an interest in. And I think that's got to be the way you do it. The local wildlife trust are really big on getting people in and taking them around the forest and explaining sometimes we have to cut down trees. It's not the end of the world, because there are actually processes involved here that mean those trees have to come down so that the rest of the wildlife can flourish. And people tend to get fixated, we can't cut trees down. No, sometimes you have to. It's part of the way the world works. You know, it's being part of that ecological system. I think that's what we need to do. The more we teach people about why the ecology matters, the bigger chance we have of getting people to come on board and go, well, actually, then I need to preserve that. I don't want to. This
is really interesting, because one of the things I've been thinking about, I'm working on another project called Hot Poets, and I've been paired with two organizations, one called Black Roots and another one called Go Grow with Love, and they're the regenerative gardeners. And you mentioned the word sustainable, so I'd like to put this question to Flo again, because it seems like there's this introduction of words that come directly from the grassroots, things like sustainability, and then it kind of gets hijacked by the corporations. And regenerative farming, and regenerative is another word, but what's the journey from sustainability? Because I think I've got two questions actually in my mind, which is about sustainable self-care, so sustainable care, and sustainable nurturance, and the journey from sustainable to regenerative. Like, does that make sense as a question? Like, what has been the journey from sustainable, say, growing to regenerative growing?
Well, I think I'll try and answer it. I think it is very much the zeitgeist. We're also talking a lot about rewilding as well. Es was saying about the verges, etc. And I think, you know, sustainable is maybe the genesis of like the awakening, the awareness, and to get to what was the other word you said?
Regenerative.
To get to regenerative, I think it is a journey. It's a journey that takes time. It's like, for example, you know, when people talk about rewilding, you have to let the ground go back to as it was. You have to leave it to go messy and not look aesthetically pleasing. And that dirty, uncomfortable bit in the middle actually is where the learning is. It's where you have to stop and observe and just kind of watch and wait for nature to take its time to get where it's going. And I think that is that's symbolic of so much of life.
Right.
In terms of sustainability, it's like, okay, getting on board with the tools and working with them to get to the regeneration. Regeneration, I think, in nature takes a while. It takes a while. I always say to my clients, gardening is slow. If you've got lots of money, you can put in the big trees and you can get the instant impact. But actually, you put in the small plants and they establish better and they will grow better. But you have to wait. You have to be patient. Yeah, but I have a question for you about, you say about writing, and the writing is passionately, the content. Where do you take that poetry, that collaboration with other people? Where do you what's the outlet for it to have an impact with a wider audience, not just your poetry audience?
That's a great question. I mean, for me, my poetry journey, my poetry career, my poetry journey has taken many bends and curves and back loops and stuff like that. And I feel like I've done a little bit of like backpedaling actually, to go back to performance. The traditional route is to get a book, put it out there, get it published, get an agent who gets it out there for you, self-publish and do the book tours and stuff like that. I'm a performance poet who has never had a collection. Don't ask me why. I think it might have something to do with just being nervous. It might be about still finding out, like, who am I? What's my voice? I don't know. How can I put collection out? But I feel really comfortable right now with looking at nature, but looking at nature because I'm recognizing that I am a part of nature. I recognize that I am part of the ecology, as S was saying previously, and looking at embodiment. I'm exploring somatic principles right now. So this is, how is the body teaching us how to be in the world? And I'm saying, how is nature teaching us to be in the world? Well, I am nature. How is my body teaching me to be in the world? So that's the voice that I want to explore right now. And I want to write a whole new body of poetry around that, around ancestral work, genetic remembrance, which is, again, just looking at the science and the makeup of the human. Where that has a market, I don't know. I've just got to write it and then see what happens. Writing about nature to have a wider audience now, I think there are prizes out there. There's the Ginkgo Prize for eco poetry writing. You've got to remember also that there's like, poetry has a sort of like a surge of genres. Like before, slam poetry didn't exist, and it was kind of born in the 80s. And then it kind of was imported into the UK over the 90s. But nobody was talking about slam poetry. They might have been talking about just poetry and performance. Performance poetry was a phrase that we had here. But the traditional route, I think it doesn't exist anymore because people are using social media. S is, as an internet, you call yourself the internet poet, so I think it's about cleverly how you're using, is that right? The internet poet, did I say that right?
My handle is the Internet of Words. That's how.
Okay.
I've lived online since the 90s, and you're quite right. There's this. I think performance is the way forward, to be honest with you, because I think you need to pull people into these stories, because again, if we look at the ecosystem as a whole and we look at where we sit in it, I think it's going to become far more powerful as a force when we make people look at their stories in that wider framework, because we all have our own separate how climate change is affecting us in different ways. I'm asthmatic, and I can tell you the last 2 weeks has been living hell for me because of the temperature rise, and this isn't going to get any better. It's not going to get any easier. Anybody with any kind of respiratory issue, any kind of immunocompromised issues, as soon as the climate starts altering, suddenly you are personally affected by it. And I think this is why words on pages are great, but words in people's heads, when you're in it, when it's happening, are far more powerful and far more effective. And I think as poets, we have a duty of care now. If we can tell these stories and we can encourage other people to not only tell their own stories, but start making a difference towards changing what's going on, that's what we should be doing. And pages, if there's nobody left to read the books, what's the point? And this,
Yeah.
I'm quite a fatalist when it comes to this. I tend to look at things and go, well, if there's nobody left to do this, what's the point in doing that in the first place? And you need to get to the point where we don't have to worry about that. And how you do that is you engage people in ways like this. You make them think, you make them act, you make them realize that they are living inside the emergency.
Yeah.
And I think that's why organizations like you know, when they turn up at cricket games or on tennis courts and start throwing stuff around and people get irritated by it, well, that's exactly what you need to do, because you need to be irritated about it, because we have a climate emergency and we're not just going to fix it by hoping somebody else does it.
Yeah, I think you need to be in your face, and I think you're right. Your performance, or your performance or recorded, well, performance, however you want to categorize that, I think is the way forward, because it's such a visual. We live in such a visual world. People are just so used to watching a clip here and there. That needs to be, I think, the delivery mechanism.
Yeah. And also, I mean, there is the project called Hot Poets there, and I've also been paired with another project called Tung Fu, which is looking at the science, pairing scientists and academics, established organizations that are used to talking about the business of climate and environmental work, and pairing them with poets, so that there's a creative and storytelling voice to that. And because I think it's people have been telling stories and they've been using poetic language since people could, we've been, since we could talk. There's always, we're not using our voices, we're using our bodies. I'm a very demonstrative poet when I don't have my iPad or whatever in my hand. And this is what I want to go back to performance, to be quite honest, a lot more. I want to go back to my theatre background, because I studied theatre and stuff like that. So, but doing that pairing, it takes the dryness out of it. It puts the emotion back into it, because academia can tend to strip these subjects of emotions. What we need to do is impact businesses who are making some of these decisions that affect people. We have to make their bottom line be about well-being, actually, as opposed to their bottom line being about how much their shares in growth, which is just unsustainable. The growth in this is just unsustainable in the system that we've been living by. So how can we make your bottom line well-being, and you will make money. And there are people who know about this. There are economists who know that, listen, if you take a more regenerative and sustainable route, there's regenerative farms. This is a fantastic thing that I found. There's Fordham Farm is a regenerative farm, and they have saved so much money not buying fertilizer. The yield is not as big. However, they are saving money because they're not buying fertilizers, and the quality of the food is better. You don't have to eat 8 oranges to get the same nutrients from one, like you would have had to do, like our grandparents would have done, because the soil is better, which means you can charge a little bit more for quality, So I think it's important that the storytelling becomes appealing, becomes attractive. Advertising knows all about this, the psychology of advertising. And I think that what we need to do is to hook people's hearts and people's minds, but also, like you said, if it's directly affecting you, telling those personal stories, and it's getting as many of those personal stories out there. And I'm finding that I've started to write a lot more personal poetry. I tend to write stories that have more character in them, as opposed to just more conceptual, sort of like, over there sort of poetry, and the trying to put the earth at a distance and actually put myself in it. So put myself in the situation, write from detail, talk about the detail, noticing, like what you were saying earlier, Flo, about growing regenerative garden being slow. And one of the first permaculture principles is observe, and to observe, you've got to slow down. You can't just be rushing past everything, and you've got to be, smelling the daisies, as they say. Is that right? Smelling the daisies? Yeah, so I'm just aware of time. We've got 5 minutes left, and
Yes, and so yes, and I wanted to ask if we do we have a call? Was it call to arms coming out of this session? Because it feels like there's some galvanizing energy here. It's like, well, what do we do? You know,
it's
what
absolutely
do
true.
we do?
Okay, well, I want to give thanks to somebody who's in this chat who has been really patient and standing by and just listening. Thank you for being with us. I've really enjoyed all three of our contributions to this conversation, and you're right, it does feel really galvanizing. I would love to connect with you, Flo, for a couple of reasons. One of them would be about how can I get into your community's garden space that you have in, I think, in Southeast London. I'm not quite sure.
Southeast London, yes, yeah.
To do some workshops, to bring the Nature Persists project there. Whatever we actually produce, how can that become a medium? How can the medium, as whether it's film, whether it's photography and storytelling, whatever it is, the poetry, how that can be part of any campaign that you're doing to raise awareness in the area. We'll be looking at being able to hold workshops. Some of them can be online for people who have access issues who can't necessarily get to the garden all the time, but we can do online work with Poets Built It. Would just love to be able to have you on board in this in some way, because you are extremely knowledgeable, extremely passionate. You're the perfect energy that Poets Built It needs, that jetpack energy to get it off the ground.
Well, if I can help, I will, honestly. And I come with a bit of a science bent as well. I think it's important that people understand exactly why things are
excellent.
dangerous as they are. We've got as a group of people now, giving people knowledge sometimes can be seen as more dangerous as not telling them what's going on. I've always been the kind of person who thinks, you know what, just have the facts in front of you. And when you actually have the facts, make your decisions based on that. So I am more than happy to come and beat the drum of, look, understand exactly what it is we're talking about here, exactly, you know, the pieces of this puzzle that come together. And the more you understand, the more it becomes obvious that we have to do something about it.
Right. The doing something is one of the things that I also am quite keen about what we can do today. And one of the things I think we talked about sustainable self-care. I spoke about that earlier. And because I think people think about sustainability and it feels so far removed from them, but actually it's the word that we can take. It doesn't necessarily have to be about policy. It doesn't necessarily have to be about funding big projects. It can be literally, how do I sustain myself in a state of well-being while there is this kind of like demand for me to be a productive human being, which makes me a good human being. You know, I'm good when I'm producing, when I'm investing all of my life energy into making somebody else some money and I don't get to see my children. Or I'm not, because now stuff is tough and I don't have any sense of self-worth because I can't go to work. Who am I? There's a lot of who am I questions that are going on post-pandemic, post-lockdown. I want to be really clear, because I mean, we're not in a pandemic as such, but that lockdown, that 2-year period, people were really having to think about their self-care and their interconnectedness, their relationship with others. So for me, this is where writing is useful. Going into natural spaces, writing in natural spaces, seeing human beings in urban green spaces and looking at the juxtaposition of nature and us being part of nature, and then us being part of nature in these, you know, these metal, hard, jagged edged spaces. You know, what's the adaptability of us as a species moving between these spaces, and writing about it and looking through another lens, the lens of imagining beyond this, the lens of my senses, body, sight, smell, taste, hearing, and the other one, touch, textures, you know, looking at textures. And that has been a great self-care for me. Studying herbs has been great self-care for me. So, you know, these are these different things. Has anybody else got any sort of hints that they might like to think about, like sustainable well-being and self-care?
Coming into
Yeah.
oh, go on, Flo.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, food, what we eat
Yes.
is really important, you know, and yeah, just, you know, it's the simple things, you know, like fresh fruit and vegetable and drinking water, you know, eschewing the juice and just drinking water or herbal teas, cutting down on the dairy, you know, dairy. I'm known as a cheese fascist in my house.
Oh
because I'm
wow,
like,
seriously.
yeah, I don't do cheese. When we went on holidays, there was a lot of cheese. There was a lot of cheese. I'm like, "Ah." So, you know, just self-care in terms of what you put into your body and looking after your body, exercise, walking, stretching. Everybody needs to stretch. Everybody needs to
It's
stretch.
very true, actually. And my approach to this, I'm a mental health advocate when I'm not doing poetry and stuff. The significance and the importance of finding a natural space in which you can feel comfortable is probably one of the most beneficial things you will ever do to alleviate mental health issues. And because I live by the sea, quite close to the Thames Estuary, the Thames Estuary is my healing space. That's where I tend to go, and I spend a lot of time standing on sandbanks and looking out into the river and feeling how I fit into this puzzle. And I think more and more as adults, we need to reconnect with that sense that we are a puzzle piece in a very big picture. And we may seem very small, but even the smallest piece, if you take it away, changes what you can see. And I think it's that sense that if you can find your space and you know where that space is, you then have the ability to move outside that space and impact the spaces around you.
Yeah.
And I'm a very big advocate for find your first point, find the place in which you begin, because all journeys have a start point and they have an end point, and that can be you. And if you can make that cyclical thing happen, there's a lot of power in that, beginning at a point and then returning to another point. And I'm a very great advocate for being out there and finding your space in the world, not your office or not your front room or not with your family, but where you as an individual exist, and use that as a starting point.
Yeah,
I'm
powerful.
seeing here that our other guest, would you like to say something? Would you like to come on camera? We do have to close this down, but would you like to come on camera and say something? Your hand is up. Yes? No? You're all good. Please do. We can't hear you at the moment, but are you saying?
Maybe you want to type something into the chat?
Yeah, type something into the chat.
Oh.
Hello, we can't hear you.
You're on mute.
No, they're not on you, but we cannot
Can't hear
hear
you. Oh, maybe they've got connection problems.
I'm so sorry, we cannot hear you, but do type something into the chat because we do have to close this session down. It's 8 o'clock now, but please do put something into the chat now, or you can straight up email and or send a message through the Eventbrite, and we can answer. I can answer a question for you. But this has been great. Thank you so much. And I really want to do this again. I would love to do this again and just like see how we move forward, because there's something here, there's something brewing. And I think the other thing that's exciting is that there's finding out that there are hundreds of these, there's thousands of movements across the country who are doing incredible community gardening, growing of food, regenerative gardening, regenerative growing. looking at sustainable living, food sovereignty. They're looking at healing communities, healing people. And I think that is something that can offer us a whole bunch of hope. I have a funny relationship with the word hope, but it's starting to sort of like ring really lovely to me right now. But I want to say massive thank you to S. Thank you so much for coming and joining us. Thank you so much, Flo.
Thank you.
And we will do this again. Okay.
Yes.
All right then.
Definitely. Nice to meet you, S.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure. I now have to go and look you up on the iPlayer because I didn't know about that there was a program like this. So I now want to go and have a look. So that's going to be my next job.
Go on then.
Thank you.
Amazing. All right then, guys.
Take care. Stay well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.